with Keir Starmer, and I started by pointing out to him that the Prime Minister has paid back the loan from the Tory party for redecorating his flat, so surely there isn't a problem.
Well, the critical question is not whether he's paid it now, but what the arrangement was in the first place, and the Prime Minister carefully avoids answering the question what happened in the first place. Obviously something went on. It seems pretty clear to me it wasn't the Prime Minister who paid in the first place. That's the question he's trying to avoid. That's the question he needs to answer. And it's a very simple question. I think many people would say that if you have your flat redecorated, you know who paid for it and you know when they paid for it. It's a very simple question. He could actually, I think he's got the Cabinet Secretary doing an investigation, got the Electoral Commission doing an investigation. Those investigations could be over in 5 minutes if the Prime Minister just answered the question, who paid for it in the first place?
But, you know, if he ultimately confirms what I think we already know, which is that the Tory party lent him the money or indeed paid the bills initially, why does that matter to anybody?
Well, it matters because the Electoral Commission is now investigating to see whether criminal offences have been committed. That's serious. The Electoral Commission don't do that sort of thing lightly. That's serious. And on the question of loans, you know, the Prime Minister tries to pretend this is just a technical issue, nobody really cares. But actually, the reason for transparency is to ensure that everybody knows where the money is coming from, so everybody knows in a transparent way who, as it were, the Prime Minister owes one to. And this argument that the Prime Minister and others are putting around that, you know, we may be up to no good, but with a bit of luck, people won't notice. I don't have any truck with that argument.
But when we talk to voters, you know, they say, well, you know, the Prime Minister deserves to live in a nice pad. I mean, they say they don't really care who paid for it. So how do you persuade them, and this sort of matters because you are making a bit of a song and dance about it, how do you persuade them that it matters? Well, I think, you know, if this was an isolated incident, that might be one thing. But over the last few weeks, what we've seen is day after day of allegations of cronyism, of contracts for mates, ministers having shares in company that are winning contracts, a former Prime Minister texting and trying to access anybody he can get his hands on, the Prime Minister in private discussions with various people. What you've seen is this sort of growing levels of sleaze. And I think people are concerned about that. And certainly I've been out in the last week or so knocking on doors across the country, and it does come up. People are concerned. Now, I'm not going to pretend for one moment that most members of the public are across the detail, nor I'm sure they've got better things to do with their lives. But they do care about this growing sense that a group of people at the top of government think that the rules don't apply to them, and there's this strong sense of one rule for them, another rule for everybody else, and that goes against a very strong British instinct. And the people who feel most strongly about it are those businesses, those who are self-employed, who've really struggled during the pandemic, and some of them are on the verge of bankruptcy. They would love to be able to access the Prime Minister or senior ministers to have a bit of a tax arrangement or tax change for them, or to access some loan or business grant that's not available to other people. So there's this strong sense that, you know, this sleaze is back, it's back for real, and it is literally one rule for them and another rule for everybody else. Now, the Prime Minister has appointed Lord Geidt to adjudicate on issues of, you know, whether ministers follow the rules, including himself, and Lord Geidt's doing an investigation into his own conduct. But it's also clear from the terms of reference that ultimately it's the Prime Minister who some would say is marking his own homework, because he'll decide whether he breached the rules and therefore has to resign. If you were Prime Minister, would you allow an independent person to adjudicate on whether you should resign, or would you just follow the Boris Johnson route? I'd have an independent adjudicator. The idea that an inquiry can't get going unless the Prime Minister says it can get going, and it can't come to conclusions that are binding unless the Prime Minister says so. I mean, this is, you know, it undermines the whole fabric. I would bring in changes, an independent advisor who can actually start investigations of his or her own volition. I'd also change the rules on lobbying so that we don't get the situation we've had with David Cameron, where if you're off the books as an employee, you don't come within the rules. And also, put in place provisions for clawing back some of the money that's gone on contracts that haven't delivered. So, if I were Prime Minister, I would make it my mission to clean up Westminster. I had to deal with prosecuting the MPs who broke the rules in relation to their expenses. So I know what tough decisions look like, and I would clear up Westminster with a whole set of new rules.
Boris Johnson denied today to MPs that he said that he would rather see bodies piled up by the 1,000 than have a third lockdown. As you know, I've got a couple of witnesses who insist he did say that. But I just want to be clear on what you're saying. I think you said today, if it can be proved that he did say this and that he misled MPs, in your view, he should resign. You will call for him to resign.
Yeah, I was very careful in the questions I put to Boris Johnson today, to the Prime Minister, and deliberately so, because somebody here isn't telling the truth. That's obvious. They can't both be right. The Prime Minister can't say, I didn't say it, and then there are a number of sources that said he did say it. Can't both be right.
But if it's proven that he did say it, he has to resign, in your view. Is that right?
That's what the Ministerial Code says, and that's why I wanted him on record in the House of Commons, because if he's misled the House of Commons, then the Ministerial Code says he has to resign.
So we're almost out of time, so a couple of quick questions. First, on that point, the Prime Minister's estranged aide, Dominic Cummings, giving evidence to MPs on May the 26th. If he were to say, for argument's sake, that he heard the Prime Minister say that, would that be good enough for you?
Well, I'd listen carefully to what he said. It's not much of a choice, is it, between Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson as to where the truth lies on any issue. Only last year we had, any number of Cabinet members lining up to say they test their eyes by driving in support of Dominic Cummings. So let's wait and see what he says, what evidence he's got. But what was important today was that the Prime Minister made not just one, but a number of declarations on the record. And obviously, I intend, if necessary, to come back to what he said on the record. And the Ministerial Code is very, very clear.
So, finally, we've got a Tory party, a Downing Street seemingly in turmoil. If, despite all that, you lose Hartlepool, what does that say about the Labour Party and your leadership?
Well, we're fighting very hard in Hartlepool. We're fighting for every vote there, and I'm well aware that we have to earn every vote. We lost the general election very badly in December 2019. My job is to rebuild trust and confidence in the Labour Party, to demonstrate that we're under new leadership, to demonstrate that our priorities are the priorities of the people of Hartlepool. That's why I've been there a number of times. I'm going there on Saturday again. But we've got to earn every vote in Hartlepool, and that's what we're doing, fighting for every vote.
And have you chosen your Downing Street wallpaper?
When I get to Downing Street, my priority will be on what's in the best interest of the country. And that's not just an aside and a joke. The idea that during the pandemic, the Prime Minister was bothering to pop out of meetings to look at wallpaper that cost £840 a roll, or even to take time on what sort of arrangements are in place for paying for his flat, tells you something about his priorities. And that something is that they're wrong.
OK, I think there's lots more to discuss, but sadly we're out of time. Very good to see you.